My name is Evelyn Parker, and the night everything changed began with a dinner that looked perfectly ordinary. The table was set with roasted salmon candles flickering, the kind of calm that makes you forget storms exist. My son Nathan poured wine into my glass, smiled the same way he did when he was 10, and proud of his report card, and said, "Mom, can you just sign this tuition paperwork before we eat?" His voice was casual, but something behind it felt rehearsed. I glanced at the folder he slid across the table. It carried the emblem of a student finance company. My heart softened. He had always been responsible, the one I trusted after his father passed. I picked up the pen. Then I saw her. Amber, my daughter-in-law, sitting across from me wearing a pale blue dress and a smile that looked painted on. She watched my hand as if it carried a secret. I asked lightly, "What is this, exactly?" Nathan said, "Routine update, Mom. Just to make tuition payments easier." I hesitated, scanning the top line. Everything looked harmless, the kind of form accountants like me have read 1,000 times. Still, the way Amber's eyes flicked between me and the paper made my skin tighten. She reached forward and refilled my glass. Her voice was warm, too warm. "You've done so much for us. This is just a small administrative thing." I smiled, pretending to read while my pulse started to count seconds. I signed my name, slowly tracing each letter. As the pen lifted, I caught Amber exhale in quiet relief. She thought I hadn't noticed the faint indentation of another page beneath the top one, the outline of a signature line copied through carbon paper. I didn't mention it. I folded the document, slipped it into my purse with an absent smile, and said, "I'll keep this safe for records." Nathan looked surprised. "I thought you'd leave it here." "I'll scan it later," I said. The conversation shifted, but the air had changed. Amber laughed louder than she needed to compliment the dessert she had barely touched. When they left, I washed the dishes one by one until my hands steadied. Then my phone vibrated on the counter. Fifth Third Bank. A text notification glowed. Wire transfer of $480,000 initiated. My breath caught. I opened the app. The transfer came from the Parker Education Trust, my late husband's legacy, the fund meant for scholarships and security. The recipient was an entity I had never seen, Clara Foundation, LLC. The timestamp was 7:42 p.m., the exact moment Amber had refilled my glass. I stood in the quiet kitchen, every detail rearranging itself into clarity. My son's signature was not mine. It was the echo of my own trust being cashed out. I sat at the counter and opened my old laptop, the one I had not touched since 2018. Buried in its archive was the first document of the trust, the blueprint of every rule that governed its protection. I read the familiar clauses line by line until I reached the section marked Beneficiary Transfer Authority. Only one name was authorized to move those funds: mine. And I had not authorized anything. My stomach tightened with a strange calm, the kind that comes not from peace, but from awakening. I checked the bank log again. The system recorded an electronic signature from a secondary user profile created 2 weeks earlier. The name on that profile was Nathan Parker. I stared at it, trying to understand how the boy I raised had become a man who saw my trust as his opportunity. The realization was cold sharp, but it did not break me. It organized me. I opened the drawer where my husband's old ledger rested. On the inside cover, in his handwriting, were the words, "Numbers don't lie, people do." I whispered it out loud. My hands stopped shaking. I turned on the small desk lamp and began to note every detail: the transfer time, the account number, the signature ID. I created a new folder titled Clara. It wasn't tuition paperwork. It was a theft wrapped in family. The betrayal sat heavy, but I didn't cry. Accountants never sign blind, and I never close a book without balancing it. When I think back to how everything began, I always return to the spring of 2015, the year my husband passed, and the house turned quiet. The silence was not cruel at first. It was the kind that reminded me of old furniture settling after decades of wait. I had worked as an accountant for nearly 30 years and understood what it meant to keep a life balanced on paper, but grief is never a clean ledger. That spring, I created something to steady myself, the Parker Education Trust. It started with the life insurance policy, some real estate equity, and a small portfolio of stocks I had managed since our first home purchase. The trust was designed to protect our future and provide for Nathan's education and whatever dreams he wanted to chase. It earned about 6% a year through fidelity, nothing glamorous but consistent the way my husband liked things. We used to say that money should breathe but never wander. Nathan was in graduate school, then still unsure whether he wanted to teach or work in finance. I remember helping him fill out forms, watching him calculate budgets, proud that he had inherited my precision, if not my patience. Those evenings were warm and steady, and for a while I believed the trust would be our quiet bridge to a peaceful life. The house in Columbus felt safe, 2 floors white, siding the photograph of my husband above the fireplace, smiling the same smile I missed every morning. When Nathan finished school, he started working for a local firm and rented an apartment not far from downtown. He met Amber at a networking event, and from the first introduction, I knew she was different. Sharp, ambitious, polished in every sentence. She talked about branding and public image, and how money was not just security, but expression. I liked her at first. Most mothers want their sons to marry women who see potential. Yet there was a moment during our second dinner together when she asked me how the trust was structured. It was casual, almost innocent, but her eyes didn't match her tone. I said it was well diversified and left it at that. She smiled, nodded, and said, "You must be very good with numbers." I told her numbers are easy. Integrity takes more work. Nathan laughed it off, unaware of the small current that had passed between us. Over time, Amber began to appear in every conversation that involved money. She had opinions about my investments, about Nathan's salary, even about how I should remodel the kitchen to increase property value. She meant well, or at least she wanted me to believe she did. After their wedding in 2019, she moved into Nathan's old room while they looked for a house of their own. I tried to make space for her to give her the warmth I would have given a daughter. We cooked together, talked about her career in public relations, her clients, her ideas. Still, each talk drifted back to finance, to trust funds, and tax efficiency. She once said, "You could earn more if you moved everything online." I smiled politely, knowing that control was rarely about profit. There was something in her confidence that made me cautious. She reminded me of auditors who ask friendly questions just to confirm what they already suspect. I began to notice how she handled Nathan's small corrections, subtle praise reminders that he should take more initiative with family matters. I stayed silent because mothers learn that silence often keeps peace. By 2020, they had bought their first condo in Short North, a modern space filled with glass and gray furniture. I helped with part of the down payment, proud and nervous. When the pandemic hit, I managed the trust remotely, watching the market swing and recover. The investments remained steady, and by 2021, the portfolio had grown to nearly $1.2 million. Nathan often said, "Mom, you should let Amber handle some of the digital stuff. She's great with it." I would nod and say, "I prefer paper." Amber would smile the kind of smile that says she has already planned the next conversation. She started visiting me alone, dropping off small gifts, always something thoughtful, a candle, a framed quote about empowerment, a box of tea. Each time the visit ended with a question about the trust. Does it have multiple signers? Do you ever worry about estate taxes? I began to realize she wasn't just curious, she was mapping it. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found her flipping through the trust binder on the coffee table. She looked up quickly and said she was just admiring the organization. I told her gently, "It's personal." She apologized, but the look in her eyes wasn't embarrassment. It was calculation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the glow of the desk lamp studying the old ledger tracing my husband's handwriting beside mine. He had written one line under the trust's first entry, "Build what you can protect." I whispered it aloud and felt a strange unease crawl into the room. When Nathan called the next morning to say Amber was suggesting a new investment platform, I felt the echo of that warning. I told him, "Let's review it together sometime." He said, Sure, Mom, it's just modernizing things. I knew that word. Modernizing often meant replacing trust with convenience. I watched from a distance as Amber managed their bills, their mortgage, their online accounts. She posted photos of brunches, charity events, travel, each caption about independence and success. People loved her confidence. I respected it too in a cautious way. But inside, I sensed that something about her needed validation through control. By late 2021, Nathan mentioned that Amber wanted to help me streamline the trust paperwork to reduce fees. I smiled, agreed to meet, and told myself to listen more than I spoke. That was always the trick in accounting. You learn the most by watching who gets nervous when the numbers start to add up. I didn't know it then, but that meeting would become the first entry in a new kind of ledger, one that would eventually record not just money, but loyalty, and how both can vanish when someone believes they deserve what they didn't build. It was early February when Amber arrived with her new plan. She came into my home office holding a glossy folder and her usual confidence. She spoke quickly, filling the air with phrases about efficiency and modernization words that sound harmless until you realize they are often used to disguise control. She said, "Mom, the trust would work so much better if we consolidated it into a single online platform. You would not have to manage multiple statements anymore, and tuition payments for Nathan's continuing courses would be smoother." I looked at her across the desk, watching the way she positioned herself between me and the window light. She had rehearsed this. I could see it in the rhythm of her pitch. Nathan followed her in, carrying his tablet already logged into a site with a sleek blue logo. He said, "It's just easier for online tuition transfers, Mom. Everyone does it now." I took the folder from Amber and studied the printout. Most of it looked legitimate account references, an address in Delaware, the same investment percentages mirrored from Fidelity. But near the bottom, almost blending into the page border, I saw the words, "Beneficiary Clara Foundation, LLC." I asked, "What is Clara Foundation?" Amber laughed lightly, the kind of laugh meant to soothe rather than answer. "It's just an intermediary platform," she said, "a way to simplify payments between trust accounts." I pretended to read further, nodding as though her explanation settled the matter. Years of auditing had taught me that confidence often hides the error column. She leaned forward and tapped the signature line with a pen she had brought herself. Nathan stood behind her, smiling nervously. I wondered if he even knew what he was signing away. I placed the document flat and said softly, "I appreciate you organizing this, Amber. Let me review it tonight and get back to you." Her smile stiffened. She wanted this done immediately. She said, "The offer expires tomorrow, but it's all standard paperwork." I told her standard things deserve a careful look. She hesitated but agreed. When they left, I sat alone and read every line again. The address for Clara Foundation led to a registered agent in Delaware, a state famous for privacy. My breath slowed as I realized how carefully this had been planned. They were moving my husband's legacy into a shell company I had never heard of using tuition as a reason to disguise a transfer of control. That night, I could not sleep. I brewed coffee and reread the trust agreement under the small desk lamp that had illuminated every tax season of my career. The clause about beneficiary change was clear. Only I could authorize a new entity. I printed a clean copy of the document and signed my name at the bottom, but not on the original. The real form went into the locked cabinet. The copy, identical in every visible way, went back into the folder Amber had given me. Paper cuts hurt more when they are signed by family. The next morning, I called Nathan. I told him I had reviewed the forms and everything seemed fine, that I would bring them by his place after lunch. He sounded relieved. "Great Mom Amber will be home. She can help with the upload." I could hear the trust in his voice, the blind trust that makes a mother's chest ache. When I arrived, Amber was already at her laptop. She took the folder and opened it, flipping directly to the last page. I noticed she didn't read, she just looked for the signature. She smiled when she saw my name and said, "Perfect. I'll scan and submit this. Right now." I said, "Keep the copy for your records. I'll keep the original in my files." She hesitated, then shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. I watched as she scanned the fake copy I had made. The satisfaction in her expression was too confident for a simple errand. I realized she truly believed she had outsmarted me. Amber spoke like a banker, not a bride. I excused myself and went to the kitchen, pretending to check my phone while she clicked through the upload process. From the doorway, I could see the reflection of her screen on the glass cabinet. She selected an account login titled Clara, typed in a long password, and whispered to herself, "Almost done." I stayed quiet. When I left, I told Nathan I was proud of him for managing things so responsibly. He hugged me, and I felt the kind of distance that no embrace can hide. That evening, I returned home and took out the small Nest Cam I had used for security years ago. I positioned it on a bookshelf facing the desk where they often reviewed paperwork with me. The red indicator light blinked once before turning invisible. I tested the angle through my phone and adjusted it until the view captured the entire workspace. I told myself it was not spying, it was accounting. I labeled the folder on my desktop The Watch. 2 days later, Amber called to confirm that everything was finalized. Her tone was cheerful, almost triumphant. She said, "You'll start seeing consolidated statements next month, all under the new platform." I thanked her and said I was grateful for her help. Then I checked my bank portal. No changes yet, but the authorization log showed a new linked entity awaiting verification. I clicked the details and read the same name again, Clara Foundation, LLC. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My pulse stayed steady, but my thoughts began organizing themselves like columns on a spreadsheet. Every number told a story. Every missing dollar leaves a trail. I wrote 3 words in my notebook: proof, motive, witness. Then I underlined them twice. I did not know how long it would take to uncover everything, but I knew this much. I had signed, but not what they thought. The first alert came on a gray Tuesday morning when I was reconciling my monthly statements. The Parker Education Trust balance was lower than expected by almost $60,000. At first, I thought it was a delayed dividend or a system lag. I logged in again and checked the transaction list. The withdrawal was tagged as authorized by N. Parker. My hand froze on the mouse. The note beside it said, "Tuition transfer." I stared at the date. It had cleared just 2 days after Amber's consolidation meeting. The pattern looked ordinary enough to someone who trusted, but to me, every decimal whispered a question. Over the next 2 weeks, 2 more identical withdrawals appeared. Each exactly $60,000, each authorized by N. Parker, each routing through the same Delaware intermediary. Fear came quietly, like the cold that creeps under a door before you notice it. I called the bank pretending to verify an old account detail. The representative confirmed that the transfers were legitimate and that authorization had been confirmed through the digital platform. I asked where the funds had gone. She read the destination aloud: Clara Foundation, LLC, Delaware. That word again. Delaware, the state where transparency goes to retire. I thanked her and hung up, breathing carefully through the hollow that had opened in my chest. He said it was for tuition. Whose education, I wondered. That evening, I opened QuickBooks and started my own audit. I downloaded every statement-matched transaction IDs and built a small chart of outgoing wires. Each one lined up perfectly with Nathan's account login. I traced one transfer deeper and followed the routing number to a purchase order filed under a real estate management account. It led to a property in Short North Columbus, a condo. I clicked through the county recorder site and saw the name listed under buyer. It was not Nathan's, not mine. It was Amber Vaughn. The realization did not bring tears. It brought silence, heavy and precise. I leaned back in the chair, remembering how my husband used to say that numbers never lie. They just wait for you to look closely. My son's hands, her shadow. They thought I didn't notice decimals. I built my life with them. Over the next week, I documented everything. Every withdrawal, every note, every timestamp. I labeled the files by month and by pattern. The trust that had taken decades to build was being dismantled $60,000 at a time. I wanted to call Nathan, but something inside me said, wait. If he was involved, Confrontation would only push him deeper into her script. If he was blind, he would defend her before he even heard the facts. I needed proof, motive, witness, 3 columns on a single page. The fear slowly shifted into strategy. I visited the condo building under the pretext of checking a nearby bakery. The manager mentioned a young couple moving in, soon paid in full cash transfer. I walked past the glass lobby and saw Amber through the window on her phone laughing. Her voice carried even through the glass. She looked radiant free of any trace of guilt. I turned away before she could see me. That night, I printed the condo listing and added it to my folder labeled Clara. I ran a search through the state's business registry. Clara Foundation LLC was incorporated 9 months earlier. Registered agent service, no employees, no history, a shell. The registered address was a shared office that hosted dozens of companies. It was almost elegant, the simplicity of it. I had seen clients do worse in corporate fraud cases, but never in a family. The betrayal of intellect hurt more than the loss itself. They had used the language of efficiency to steal intimacy. I returned to QuickBooks and set up alerts on every linked account. Each time a new transaction occurred, I wanted to know within minutes. When the next $60,000 vanished, I was ready. I exported the confirmation slip, noted the timestamp, and matched it to the security footage from the Nest Cam I had installed. The camera caught Amber sitting at my desk during a casual visit, her hands moving swiftly over the keyboard, while Nathan fetched coffee in the kitchen. I paused the frame at the moment she smiled. It was a small smile, practiced and victorious. I saved the still image under the file name Entry A. I could hear my husband's voice in my head the way he used to whisper during tax season. You cannot fix what you do not face. The truth was no longer abstract. It had a date, a dollar value, and a face. I made a plan. First, document. Second, verify. Third, reveal. I knew that once this came to light, it would divide our family permanently. But silence would make me complicit. I opened a new spreadsheet titled Watch Ledger and began listing every clue in order. Transaction 1, transaction 2, camera footage, voice log account, origin condo title. It was not anger driving me anymore. It was arithmetic. By the end of that week, the missing total reached $480,000. The figure sat in the corner of the spreadsheet like a living thing. I looked at it and felt something inside me harden, not with rage, but with precision. They thought the old woman would never notice. But every number tells its own story, and mine was about to speak. The morning after discovering the final transfer, I woke with the same clarity I used to feel before an audit. The kind of calm that hides steel underneath. I brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and sat down at my desk. The spreadsheet from the night before waited on the screen, quiet but alive. I whispered to myself, they hid numbers. I will find their pattern. I began by restoring my old accounting archive from an external drive I had not touched since 2016. It still held client data templates and a few diagnostic tools from my consulting days. One of them was a small software keylogger I had once used to track unauthorized access in a corporate theft case. I reinstalled it not out of anger, but necessity. Revenge is not rage. It is documentation. I linked the Nest Cam feed to my phone and checked the footage again. Amber had sat at my desk 3 separate times in the last month, always during casual visits, always when Nathan was present. Each time she glanced over her shoulder before opening the laptop. I cataloged each clip, labeling them by date and duration. I exported the data into a folder named Watch Ledger. I then opened the browser history and synced it with my cloud backups. The bookmarks revealed a recent link to an email account under the domain clarafoundationmail.com. I opened my own email and searched the archive for anything containing the word Clara. To my surprise, I found an automated message from a year earlier. It was a notification about a new joint inquiry request submitted under my name to a brokerage service in Delaware. I had ignored it at the time, assuming it was spam. Now it read like a confession written in pixels. I copied the message source, extracted the authentication header, and found the originating IP address. It was from the same provider Amber used for her PR work. My heart thudded once, then steadied. I spent hours cross-checking every trace. I discovered that the first wire had not been sent from my usual IP location, but from a nearby network used by their condo building. I smiled to myself. They were predictable. That evening, I turned on the Nest Cam live view and watched their living room in the background of a FaceTime call. Nathan was talking about refinancing while Amber sat beside him, typing on her phone. She said they were exploring property management options. I listened and took notes. She did not realize that every word was being transcribed through my audio capture software. At 9:30 after they hung up, I downloaded the recording and saved it. I labeled it Entry D. My hands were steady. The fear had evaporated, replaced by something precise and cold. I was not angry. I was auditing. The next morning, I began compiling every transaction into a single report matching timestamps to the video evidence. I annotated each with short comments. Example, February 12th. Withdrawal, 60,000 authorization signature. N. Parker visual confirmation. Amber at desk duration, 5 minutes facial expression. Confident, March 7th. Withdrawal, 60,000 verbal confirmation over dinner. Mention of new condo appliances. The ledger was becoming a map of deceit. At noon, I took a break to water the plant's sunlight stretching across the hardwood floor. For a brief moment, I felt peace, not from forgiveness, but from control. That evening, I opened the last unread folder on my old desktop. It contained my husband's tax archives and a backup of family financials. Inside was an encrypted file labeled parkerhome.key. I decrypted it with an old password hint and found an email exchange between my husband and our attorney from years ago. It reminded me that the trust included a clause allowing me to appoint a successor beneficiary under specific fraud conditions. I had almost forgotten it existed. I called my old lawyer, Patrick O'Neill, who had since retired to a quiet practice outside Columbus. His voice was slower now, but still sharp. I told him briefly that I suspected fraudulent transfers and that I needed discretion. He said, "Send what you have, but let me look before we act." I replied, "Don't act yet. Let's audit their souls first." He chuckled softly, perhaps remembering how I used to phrase things that way. I sent him a secure folder containing the watch ledger screenshots, video stills, transaction reports, and the Delaware incorporation document. Within an hour, he wrote back, "Evelyn, this is more than enough to establish intent. But if you want full closure, wait until they confirm it in their own words." I knew he was right. I drafted a short note to myself on the top of the file, "Evidence without confrontation is half a truth." That night, I revisited the Nest Cam footage again. At one point, Amber leaned close to the screen and typed something into the login portal. The glare revealed her reflection in the monitor. I zoomed in and captured the moment she entered the password. Clara 2023. I froze the frame. The irony made me laugh quietly. People who think they are clever rarely change their passwords. I tried the same combination on the Foundation's website and it opened. Inside were 4 folders: investments, real estate, transfers, and notes. Each folder mirrored my trust documentation, but rewritten in Amber's language. Under notes, she had written a checklist titled Phase 2. It included a plan to dissolve the foundation and move assets into a consulting firm under her maiden name. I read the last line twice. "Once she signs the final document, we can close this cycle." My pulse stayed even. I downloaded everything and backed it up on an encrypted drive. I did not confront them, not yet. I watched. Every day for a week, I reviewed the data, refining the timeline and cross-referencing every amount. I turned the chaos of betrayal into a balance sheet of accountability. On the 7th night, I printed the summary report and held it under the warm desk lamp. The total stood at $480,000. The number did not make me tremble any more. It was exact, final, undeniable. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the framed family photo and whispered, "They hid numbers." I found their pattern. Then I closed the folder and prepared for the next step. Amber called on a Thursday evening with an invitation that sounded rehearsed. She said they wanted to have dinner together at their condo in Short North to celebrate finally getting settled. Her tone carried a hint of forced cheer, the kind that tries to disguise anxiety. I accepted with the same calm I used when entering a negotiation I already understood. The drive across town was quiet. Downtown Columbus glimmered with late spring light, the kind that lingers just long enough to make everything look clean. When I arrived, the building's lobby smelled of new paint and ambition. Nathan met me at the elevator, smiling like nothing had changed. He looked younger, lighter, almost proud. He said Amber had cooked everything herself. I followed him inside and immediately noticed the decor glass chrome abstract art, the unmistakable signature of money spent too fast. The wine glasses were already filled. On the dining table beside the candlelight and folded napkins, I saw a stack of papers partly covered by a dish towel. My instinct noticed before my eyes confirmed it. Real estate documents. I saw the name printed clearly at the top of the first page, Amber Vaughn. I sat down, careful not to disturb them. Amber came out of the kitchen wearing a silk blouse, smiling like a hostess on camera. She said, "We wanted you to see what we've built. You made this possible, Evelyn." I nodded and replied, "It looks beautiful." She poured more wine into my glass, her bracelet clinking against the bottle. Wine can't wash guilt, I thought. We made small talk about the neighborhood, her client's Nathan's work. Every answer she gave sounded rehearsed, like a speech practiced in the mirror. The air had that fragile quality of conversations where everyone is pretending not to know the truth. When she excused herself to check the oven, I reached into my purse and pressed the small button on my phone to start recording. The device sat in my lap, invisible under the napkin. The seconds began to count silently on the screen. Nathan asked about the trust again, whether I had noticed any new statements. I said, "Everything seems stable." Amber returned with the main course and sat across from me. She raised her glass. "To family," she said, "to trust." They toasted to their future with my past. The moment the glasses clinked, I saw a flash of triumph in her eyes. It was small, but unmistakable. Nathan looked down quickly, pretending to adjust his napkin. I let them talk. Silence was my witness. They chatted about the condo purchase, careful not to mention how it was paid for. Amber said, "It feels so good to finally own something together." Nathan smiled and said, "Yeah, and once Mom signs that last form, we'll be completely clear." I kept my face still. The words landed softly, but they were everything I needed. Once she signs the last form, we're clear. I repeated it silently, locking the phrase in memory. I glanced at the papers on the table again, the edge of the signature line visible beneath the towel. Amber followed my gaze and casually covered it with her elbow. I smiled, asked for more water, and listened as she spoke about hosting family events, about how this was a new chapter for everyone. My heart did not race. My pulse stayed even. Every detail of the scene etched itself into my mind, the flicker of the candles, the sound of distant traffic, the soft hum of the refrigerator. When the meal ended, Amber insisted on dessert. She disappeared into the kitchen again, humming to herself. Nathan poured more wine and said, "Mom, I know you probably think we're rushing things, but this condo is a smart investment." I said, "I'm sure it is." He smiled with relief, unaware that my phone continued recording under the napkin. Amber returned with slices of cheesecake and set one in front of me. I thanked her and asked, "How long did it take to close on the property?" She hesitated just enough to tell the truth without words. "About a month," she said, looking away. I nodded and took a small bite. When I finally stood to leave, I told them it had been a lovely evening. Nathan walked me to the elevator again, holding the door like he used to when he was a teenager. For a moment, I almost believed this was still my son. On the drive home, I played back the recording. The sentence rang clear through the soft clatter of dishes. "Once she signs the last form, we're clear." The words sat in the air like evidence already sworn in. I saved the file under the name Dinner Entry. That night, as I washed the smell of wine from my hands, I thought of my husband again. He used to say that the truth always finds its accountant. I looked out the window toward the quiet street, feeling the faint tremor of satisfaction that comes from knowing a story is about to balance itself. By the time spring rolled into May, I had everything I needed. The watch ledger was no longer a set of scattered files, but a complete case file, neat and indexed. 214 pages of statements, transfers, screenshots, receipts, and video stills, every line verified, every date precise. I printed a cover page titled "The Parker Trust Audit" and bound it like a report for court. Then I sent a digital copy to Patrick O'Neill. Within 48 hours, he called. His voice carried the calm of someone who had seen every kind of deception and still respected the evidence more than emotion. He said, "Evelyn, I went through everything. This is airtight. Intent, premeditation, digital trace, and misrepresentation. If you file this, it will move quickly." I replied, "Not yet. Prepare it, but do not file. I want them to see it first." He paused. "You want to show them the blade before it cuts?" I said, "Exactly." He exhaled slowly and said he would have the preliminary legal packet ready whenever I decided. After the call, I saved the full case file on a flash drive and locked it in the desk drawer beside my late husband's watch. The symbolism was not lost on me. Evidence and time side by side. That afternoon, I scanned the headlines on social media while waiting for Patrick's confirmation email. That was when I saw Amber's post, a photo of her and Nathan standing on their condo balcony, glasses of wine raised against the skyline. The caption read, "We finally made it on our own." My chest went still, not with pain, but with a cold amusement. They went public before I did. I stared at the image for a long minute. Nathan's smile looked tense, as if he understood too late that success built on silence is fragile. Amber looked radiant, chin lifted, wearing the same gold bracelet she had the night of the dinner. The comments poured in. "So proud of you both. Hard work pays off. Love this view." The court of Facebook is faster than the law. I scrolled through every line, noting each word of praise that would soon sound different when the truth came out. I did not type a sentence or a speech. I simply commented with one emoji, a briefcase. Then I closed the app. Some receipts do not need a judge yet. Over the next few days, small ripples began to move through our circle. My sister called and said, "Did you see Amber's post?" "They are really showing off." I said, "Let them." Pride is good at advertising its own expiration date. I spent the next 3 nights finalizing my documentation with Patrick. We created a digital audit trail that could survive any claim of tampering. He instructed me to keep physical copies in a fireproof box. I followed every instruction. I was methodical, detached, precise. Every page carried my initials, every file a timestamp. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. On Saturday morning, Patrick emailed the preliminary litigation notice, an internal draft marked "not filed." Attached was his note, "We are ready whenever you are." I opened the document and read the opening paragraph aloud. It was written in clean legal language that left no room for sympathy. The defendants, Nathan Parker and Amber Vaughn, knowingly and willfully diverted funds totaling $480,000 from the Parker Education Trust through false representation and forged authorization. The rest was technical, but each line felt like a quiet restoration of balance. I closed the file and thought of how far I had come from the night I first saw the missing $60,000. What had started as fear was now structure. What had begun as a wound had become a record. That afternoon, I went grocery shopping as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I walked through the aisles of the local Kroger, passing shelves of fruit bread milk. Every detail felt sharper, almost cinematic. Normal life was the most perfect camouflage. I bumped into an old colleague who asked how retirement was treating me. I smiled and said, "Productive." That evening, I brewed tea, opened my laptop, and scrolled again through Amber's Facebook. The photo had gained more than 200 likes. Someone had tagged a local real estate page, congratulating her on the purchase. I noticed her writing a reply, "We worked so hard for this." Nothing comes easy when you build from zero. I whispered, "You built from someone's years, not zero." I clicked the comment thread open again and watched as her network of acquaintances praised her determination. It was surreal to see lies gather applause. I took one screenshot of the post just to add to the file. Proof of perception, my old mentor used to call it. Sometimes what people believe is part of the evidence too. Late that night, Patrick sent one final message. "If you want to make them aware without filing, I can deliver a courtesy notice. It will be official enough to frighten them, informal enough to let you control the timing." I wrote back perfect. "Do it discreetly." 2 days later, I received confirmation that the letter had been hand-delivered. It simply stated that the Parker Education Trust was under legal audit and that potential beneficiaries would be contacted. Nothing more. It was enough. That evening, I sat by the window watching the last light fade across the neighborhood. The phone stayed silent. They had received it, but there was no reply. The tension that had followed me for months began to dissolve. I realized justice in its purest form is not a loud confrontation, but the quiet moment when truth becomes undeniable. Before going to bed, I opened my folder one last time and scrolled through the pages. Statements, receipts, transfers, screenshots, photos, videos, 214 in total, each one a heartbeat of proof. I whispered to myself, "It is ready." Then I shut down the laptop and turned off the lights, knowing that the next time I would see their faces, the performance would be over. By June, the tension had reached the quiet point before collision, the moment every accountant knows when numbers stop lying and start testifying. I invited the entire family to dinner at the Avenue Steak Tavern, the same place we had celebrated Nathan's graduation years before. The invitation was polite, short, impossible to refuse. I wanted witnesses who would not understand at first but would never forget later. The restaurant's private room smelled of cedar and wine. I arrived early carrying a small black folder and a flash drive. Patrick sat at the corner table reviewing documents on his tablet. He looked up, nodded, and said softly, "Tonight will be remembered." I replied, "That's the point." When the family arrived, laughter filled the space, forced and uneven. Amber wore a red dress, elegant and self-assured, her hand resting possessively on Nathan's arm. She greeted everyone with hugs, compliment stories about her clients, her firm, her future, the sound of confidence before collapse. I waited until the plates were cleared and the candles burned lower. When Amber raised her glass for a toast, I connected the flash drive to the restaurant's projector. The first image appeared on the wall behind me, a bank statement with the Parker Education Trust header. The room went still. Amber froze mid-sentence. I said calmly, "This is what tuition paperwork cost me." The next slide showed the transfer confirmation to Clara Foundation LLC, followed by the Delaware registration, then the photo of their condo's deed with her name printed across the top. The sequence moved like a heartbeat, transaction signature proof. Amber tried to laugh a brittle sound that cracked in the air. Nathan stared down at his plate, his hand trembling. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I simply narrated. Every number you see here came from my husband's life insurance from the years we built this family. The money was not lost. It was redirected by people I trusted. The silence was a physical weight. Someone coughed. Amber whispered, "This is out of context." I looked at her and said, "Context is what thieves use to explain accounting." She stood up, her face pale, voice shaking, saying it was a misunderstanding, a mix-up. I clicked again. The next slide played the short clip from my Nest Cam, her sitting at my desk typing. The room exhaled collectively. Nathan pushed his chair back, whispering her name like a plea. She covered her face with her hands. I let the video end before speaking. I said quietly, "You toasted to your future with my past." Amber began to cry soft at first, then uncontrolled. Nathan whispered, "Mom, please, we can fix this." Before I could answer, the door opened and Patrick walked in, holding a single envelope. He placed it on the table between us. "Notice of asset freeze," he said. The color drained from Amber's face. She sat down slowly, tears smudging her makeup. Nathan reached for the paper, but Patrick stopped him. "It's not filed yet," he said. "But it will be if any more funds move." I nodded, signaling that was all I wanted. Then I gathered my folder, looked at everyone, and said, "Dinner is on me, but this story belongs to all of us now." I left before anyone spoke again. That night, one of my nieces who had filmed part of the confrontation uploaded the clip to Facebook with the caption, "When Karma arrives at dinner." By morning, it had more than 100,000 views. By evening, it passed 1 million. The comments multiplied faster than anyone could moderate. People shared it across groups, especially Columbus Moms group, where it went viral. The footage showed only fragments Amber's face as the slides appeared. My calm voice explaining the word tuition, glowing on the wall. Viewers wrote paragraphs about justice, betrayal, motherhood, and greed. News outlets picked it up under the headline, "Local Family Dinner Turns into Financial Exposé." Amber wanted attention. She got it. Within 2 days, her employer, a local PR firm, released a statement announcing her suspension pending review of ethical misconduct. The irony was perfect. Her PR career ended with bad publicity. I heard from a friend that she was seen crying in her car outside the office, her lipstick-streaked phone buzzing nonstop. The internet never forgets. Nathan deactivated his social accounts, and for the first time since this began, the world around me felt balanced again. I did not celebrate. I went for a walk along the Scioto Mile, letting the evening air wash away the noise. Justice had unfolded without my voice rising once. When I returned home, Patrick called. He said the viral part complicates things, but it also protects you. No one can twist this now. I told him I wasn't worried. Public truth was the only verdict I needed. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the video again. I watched Amber's expression freeze at the exact moment the slide changed to her name. I paused it there and closed the screen. Some lessons write themselves. Before going to bed, I wrote a single line in my notebook. Silence is the cleanest kind of revenge. Then for the first time in months, I slept without fear. If you have ever wanted to see karma trend hit like right now. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and nerves. It was mid-August when the case finally reached its hearing. The viral video had faded from public conversation, but its echo remained in every headline, every whispered conversation outside the courthouse. The sign on the door read, "Franklin County Probate and Financial Crimes Division." Inside, I sat beside Patrick at the wooden table, a quiet observer to the story I had already lived through. Across the aisle sat Amber, pale and subdued, her red hair tied back her blazer too large for her frame. Nathan was beside her, avoiding my gaze. The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes that had seen every kind of family disaster money could buy. She began by summarizing the evidence. The court had reviewed full documentation, the Parker Education Trust transfers, the false beneficiary filings, the Delaware registration of Clara Foundation LLC, and the recorded admissions made at the dinner. There was no doubt left. The only question now was consequence. Amber's attorney tried to argue intent, saying she acted under misunderstanding, that she believed Nathan had authorization to redirect funds. The judge listened, expression unmoved. She said misunderstanding does not move $480,000 across state lines. Amber's shoulders sank. Nathan spoke briefly, voice trembling, admitting he had signed forms without reading them. When asked why, he said, "I trusted my wife." The irony did not escape anyone in the room. When it was my turn to testify, Patrick handed me the statement we had prepared, but I folded it and spoke directly. I said I did not lose money. I invested it in the truth. The courtroom went silent for a moment. The judge nodded slightly, then continued with the formal reading of judgment. The verdict was clear. Amber Vaughn was found guilty of financial misappropriation and ordered to serve probation with restitution of full funds plus penalty interest supervised by the state. Nathan Parker, having participated in the transaction as a co-signer, was required to surrender 40% of his current assets toward repayment. Additionally, the Internal Revenue Service was authorized to audit all joint accounts for undeclared income related to the misuse of trust funds. Justice came with court stamps. The sound of the gavel was not loud, but it was final. She taught manipulation, the law taught math. The courtroom clerk recorded every word while Amber wiped her eyes silently. As the judge dismissed the session, reporters waiting outside began calling questions. Patrick shielded me with his briefcase as we walked through the marble corridor. He whispered, "You handled that perfectly. Most people shout when they win. You just close the book." I said, "It was never about victory. It was about proof." Outside the courthouse, the sun felt brighter than it should have. People moved past, unaware that the story they had watched online was now resolved in ink and judgment. Within a week, the local news outlets picked it up again. The Columbus Dispatch headline read, "Local PR Manager Under Investigation for Trust Fraud." They included her mugshot from the booking office, the caption formal and cold. She was placed under a 5-year financial operations restriction, effectively ending her ability to work in any public relations or marketing firm that handled client accounts. Not all influencers influence the right things. The IRS audit revealed another layer. Over the past 2 years, Amber had been earning sponsorship payments through small social media campaigns and never declared them. The total was modest, but enough to trigger a federal compliance penalty. The court extended her financial suspension to include prohibition from any self-employment or trust management role for 5 years. Her name appeared on the state's registry of restricted financial actors, a list usually reserved for disbarred brokers and fraudulent tax preparers. Nathan's penalty came quietly. The firm he worked for reviewed his conduct and placed him on indefinite leave. Without income, he was forced to sell their condo. The same place they had toasted champagne now had a for sale sign by the door. The proceeds went directly to restitution. Patrick sent me an email confirming receipt of the repayment notice. His message said, "The law has collected what dignity already did." I read it twice and closed my laptop. The next morning, I drove past the courthouse again on my way to the grocery store. A reporter stood outside filming a segment. I caught a few words through the radio later. Experts say the case highlights the growing trend of digital trust fraud within families. The phrase sounded clinical, but beneath it was the real truth. Betrayal is not digital. It is personal. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to circulate in professional circles. Law journals referenced it as a precedent for spousal fiduciary abuse cases. Patrick said it would likely be cited in future estate law discussions. I told him that was fine. Let the lesson travel. Amber disappeared from social media entirely. Her last post was the same balcony photo that had started it all. It remained frozen in time, a monument to irony. I never checked the comments again. Nathan attempted to send a letter through Patrick's office expressing remorse. I did not respond. Instead, I mailed a single-page statement to the court, confirming completion of my cooperation with the investigation. The rest was silence. One evening, a friend stopped by for coffee and asked how it felt to have everything back. I said I did not get everything back. I got what mattered. She nodded, understanding more than I expected. As the weeks passed, the noise faded and normal life returned. I attended community events, volunteered at the local library, and spoke quietly to a few women who had experienced similar betrayals. The story had reached more people than I ever imagined, but what stayed with me most was the look on the judge's face when she said the words, "Restitution approved." It was not triumph, it was closure. Late one night, I opened the old binder labeled Parker Education Trust and added one final document, the court's closure certificate. I wrote the date below it and whispered, "Balance achieved." The numbers added up at last. 3 months later, the leaves had begun to turn, and the air in Columbus carried the faint smell of rain and resignation. I was pruning the garden when I heard the knock on the front door. It was slow, hesitant. the kind that carries guilt instead of purpose. When I opened it, Nathan stood there thinner, pale, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. For a moment, I barely recognized the confident young man who once promised his father's legacy would live through him. He clutched a worn envelope and looked at me like a child again. He said, "Mom, can we talk?" I stepped aside, wordless, and let him in. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock on the mantel. He stood in the same spot where he had once opened his college acceptance letter, the same light filtering through the curtains, only now his hands shook. He said Amber left 3 weeks ago. She took the last of her things and a car he could not afford. He had lost his job at Thompson & Myers LLP because of what the company called a trust conflict. He was living in a rented apartment near the community college, working part-time, doing entry-level accounting. He said, "I'm sorry for everything. I was stupid. I thought I was fixing things for us." His voice broke on the word us. I listened without interruption. When he finally asked, "Mom, please, I just need help," the words felt like echoes of another life. I looked at him for a long time before answering. "You need help, but not from me." His shoulders sank as if the air had been pulled from the room. I told him, "There are lessons that cannot be bought back with apologies. You took what your father built, what I protected, and treated it like leverage." He tried to speak again, but no words came. Instead, he nodded slowly and said, "I understand." He turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. He asked quietly, "Do you still think of me as your son?" I replied, "Always, but not as the man you became." He lowered his head and stepped outside. Through the window, I watched him walk down the driveway. Shoulders hunched, the rain beginning to fall. There was no anger left in me, only the faint ache of disappointment settling into something permanent. He did not lose my money. He lost my respect. That night, I sat in the living room surrounded by old photographs. One showed Nathan as a boy holding his father's toolbox, smiling proudly. I placed it face down. Sometimes silence is the loudest lesson. In the following weeks, I heard fragments about his life through distant relatives. He had applied to several firms, but none wanted the liability of a name tied to a public trust case. The only place that offered him a position was the community college's night accounting program. He taught basic bookkeeping to students half his age. He lived modestly, quietly, and for the first time, perhaps honestly. A neighbor who knew him said he often stayed late after class grading papers, then sat in the empty parking lot looking at old photos on his phone. One evening, he sent a letter again. It was simple, written in neat lines. It said, "I understand now what you were teaching me. I hope someday I can earn back your trust, even if not your forgiveness." I read it once and placed it in a drawer without reply. Forgiveness is not free. It requires proof of change, and he was only at the beginning of that balance sheet. Winter arrived early that year. On Christmas morning, I looked out the window and saw the world coated in pale white. I thought of how every snowfall hides the damage beneath, only to melt and reveal it later. It was a metaphor for him, for me, for the cycle we had lived. In the distance, church bells rang. I whispered a quiet prayer, not for reconciliation, but for understanding. He needed the kind of silence that teaches accountability. I needed the kind that heals. Months later, I heard he had saved enough to repay part of his restitution. He mailed a check to the court rather than to me, and that small act told me he was learning. Still, I never called. Closure sometimes requires distance, not dialogue. One evening, while locking the front door, I saw his car parked down the street. He never came to the door, just sat inside for a while before driving away. The headlights disappeared into the rain. I felt neither sorrow nor victory, only peace that the story had found its consequence. That night, before sleeping, I wrote one final line in my notebook beside the others. Redemption begins with humility, not inheritance. Spring returned quietly the following year, soft and slow like forgiveness itself. By then, the court's restitution had been paid in full, and the last of the paperwork was filed away in my drawer beside my husband's watch. I spent my mornings walking the same trail near the river where I used to think about loss, only now I thought about what could grow from it. The idea for the Parker Quiet Justice Fund began there, written first in the margins of my notebook. It would help women who had been financially exploited by their own families, women who had been told to sign something routine and then lost everything. Patrick helped me structure it legally. He said, "You are turning pain into precedent." We registered the fund as a nonprofit in March. The first workshop was held at the Columbus Public Library with 5 women in attendance. I taught them how to read bank statements, how to identify fraudulent transfers, how to set up independent trusts. By summer, the fund had grown enough to sponsor small grants for legal consultations. The Columbus Dispatch published an article titled, "The Accountant Who Made Karma Count." The photo showed me at my desk, surrounded by ledgers and quiet smiles. It felt strange to become a headline after living one. Donations began arriving, many anonymous, some from people I would never meet. Each note carried a story of survival. One said, "Your story helped me walk away from a son who used my credit." Another said, "You reminded me it is not cruel to protect what you built." I kept every letter in a box labeled gratitude. Meanwhile, life went on around me. The leaves turned again, the air cooled, and I found a rhythm that felt like peace. Then one afternoon while shopping at Kroger, I saw a familiar face behind the register, Amber. Her hair was shorter, her uniform neat, her hands steady as she scanned groceries. For a second, the world seemed to pause. I placed my items on the belt and waited. When she looked up, recognition flickered and her voice faltered on the greeting. She whispered, "Paper or plastic?" I said softly, "Paper, please." She bagged the groceries in silence. When the transaction was complete, I looked at her and said, "Keep both feet on the ground this time." Her eyes filled with something I could not name. Shame. Maybe gratitude. I picked up the bags and walked toward the door without looking back. Outside, the afternoon light spilled across the parking lot, warm and golden. Some ledgers are balanced in silence. I placed the groceries in the trunk and paused to breathe. It was not victory I felt, but release. Her justice was not revenge. It was restoration. That evening, I returned to my office where the new logo of the Parker Quiet Justice Fund gleamed on the glass door. Inside, the volunteers were sorting through applications. One woman looked up and smiled, asking, "Are we still on track for next week's seminar?" I nodded. The air smelled of coffee and optimism. The fund had already helped 15 women open independent accounts, 3 secure legal restitution, and 1 start her own business. The walls were lined with framed quotes about integrity and independence. None of them were dramatic, but each one mattered. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote the closing line of the fund's mission statement. We teach not revenge, but responsibility. Peace does not shout, it signs. The sun was setting outside, painting the skyline with the same color as the old leather folder that had once held my evidence. The past and the present folded neatly into each other. Before leaving, I turned off the lights and looked one last time at the logo on the glass. It shimmered faintly under the streetlight. As I locked the door, I realized I no longer felt the weight of what had happened. Justice had moved from my story to theirs, and that was enough. If Evelyn's story gave you strength, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Maybe your quiet justice is next.